The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty plains of Montana Territory as Sarah Mackenzie clutched her reins with trembling hands. Her horse, a gentle mare named Belle, had been limping for the past 2 miles, and now they were both stranded in the middle of nowhere with storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Sarah was 22 years old, with auburn hair that caught the light like copper pennies and green eyes that usually sparkled with determination. Today, however, those eyes held nothing but worry and pain. She had been riding for 3 days straight, fleeing from a situation back in Dodge City that she couldn't bear to think about. The bruises on her arms had faded to yellow and purple, hidden beneath her long sleeves, but the memories were still fresh and raw. She had taken only what she could carry: a small bag of belongings, her late mother's silver locket, and the $43 she had saved from working at the general store. It wasn't much to start a new life, but it was all she had. Her destination was her aunt's ranch near Billings, though she wasn't even sure her aunt was still alive. The last letter had come 2 years ago. As Belle favored her left front leg more severely, Sarah knew she had to find help soon. The storm was moving in fast, and she could already smell rain in the air. In the distance, she spotted a thin column of smoke rising from what looked like a small ranch house nestled in a valley between 2 hills. It was her only option. The ride down into the valley was slow and careful. Belle was clearly in pain, and Sarah whispered gentle words of encouragement to her faithful companion. As they approached the ranch, Sarah could see it was a modest operation: a simple wooden house with a wide porch, a barn that had seen better days, and corrals holding a few dozen cattle. Chickens pecked in the yard, and a large dog came running toward them, barking a warning. "Easy, boy," Sarah called out, though her voice shook slightly. She had learned to be cautious around strangers, especially men living alone in remote places. The front door of the house opened, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at the collar of his worn shirt, and his face was weathered by sun and wind. Sarah guessed he was in his early 30s, though it was hard to tell with the deep lines around his eyes that came from squinting into bright sunlight day after day. "Ma'am," he called out, touching the brim of his hat politely. "Looks like you might need some help." Sarah hesitated. Everything in her recent experience told her to be wary, to keep riding despite Belle's condition. But the storm was almost upon them, and she could see genuine concern in the stranger's dark eyes, not the predatory look she had learned to fear. "My horse has gone lame," she said, staying mounted but ready to flee if necessary. "I was hoping to make it to Billings, but I don't think she can carry me much further." The man stepped down from the porch and approached slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Name's Jacob Martinez," he said. "This is my ranch. Why don't you let me take a look at your horse?" "Please," Sarah said, and there was something desperate in her voice that made Jacob look at her more closely. "It hurts. She's been favoring that leg for miles now." Jacob nodded and gently took Belle's bridle. "Easy, girl," he murmured to the horse, his voice low and soothing. He ran his hands expertly down Belle's leg, and the mare flinched when he reached her fetlock. "Looks like she's got some swelling here. Probably stepped wrong in a gopher hole or hit a rock. Nothing that won't heal with rest and care." The first fat raindrops began to fall as Jacob looked up at Sarah. "Storm's coming in fast. You'd better come inside before it hits. I can put your horse in the barn and tend to that leg." Sarah bit her lip, weighing her options. The rain was starting to come down harder, and Belle needed care. But accepting help from a strange man in an isolated place brought back all the fears that had driven her from Kansas. "I don't want to impose," she said carefully. "No imposition," Jacob replied, though he noticed how she tensed when he moved closer. "My grandmother always said turning away someone in need brings bad luck. Besides, it wouldn't be right to send a lady back out into weather like this." As if to emphasize his point, a crack of thunder split the air, and the rain began to pour in earnest. Sarah made her decision. She dismounted, wincing slightly as her feet hit the ground. She had been riding hard for days, and her whole body ached. Jacob noticed the slight grimace and the careful way she moved, filing it away with his other observations about this mysterious woman who had appeared at his ranch. There was something fragile about her despite her obvious strength, something that reminded him of a wild bird with a broken wing. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly as they led Belle toward the barn. "I'm Sarah. Sarah Wells." She had decided to use her mother's maiden name rather than risk being found. The barn was warm and dry, filled with the familiar smells of hay and horses. Jacob worked efficiently to remove Belle's saddle and bridle, then examined the injured leg more thoroughly. Sarah watched his gentle, competent hands as he worked, noting how Belle seemed to trust him immediately. "She'll be fine," Jacob said finally. "Just needs rest and some cold compresses on that swelling. I'll make up a poultice tonight that should help." "I can pay for her keep," Sarah said quickly, reaching for the small purse hidden in her skirt pocket. Jacob held up a hand. "We'll worry about that later. Right now, let's get you inside before you catch your death." The ranch house was simple but comfortable, with handmade furniture and colorful woven rugs that spoke of Mexican heritage. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah noticed how clean everything was, how carefully maintained despite the obvious age of the furnishings. "Coffee?" Jacob offered, moving to the stove. "Or maybe something to eat? You look like you haven't had a proper meal in a while." Sarah realized she was indeed hungry. She had been surviving on hardtack and whatever she could forage along the way, too afraid to stop in towns where she might be recognized or remembered. "Coffee would be wonderful," she said, then added quietly, "if it's not too much trouble." Jacob studied her as he prepared the coffee. There was definitely something wrong here, the way she held herself, the wariness in her eyes, the careful politeness that seemed designed to avoid drawing attention. He had seen that look before, in animals that had been mistreated. It made something protective stir in his chest. "No trouble at all," he said gently. "Make yourself comfortable. This storm looks like it might last a while." Sarah perched carefully on the edge of a chair near the fireplace, ready to run if necessary but grateful for the warmth. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, rain lashing against the windows and wind howling around the eaves of the house. As Jacob moved around the kitchen, Sarah found herself studying him covertly. He moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own space, and she noticed that he was careful to keep his distance, seeming to sense her nervousness. There was something kind in his face, something that reminded her of her father before the war had changed him. "You've come a long way," Jacob observed casually as he poured the coffee. It wasn't quite a question, but Sarah felt compelled to answer. "From Kansas," she said, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "I'm heading to Billings to stay with my aunt." Jacob nodded, not pushing for more information though he could see there was much more to the story. "That's still a fair piece from here. Were you planning to make it in one ride?" Sarah's cheeks flushed slightly. She realized how foolish her plan must seem to someone who knew the territory. "I suppose I didn't think it through very well," she admitted. "First time traveling alone?" Jacob asked gently, settling into a chair across from her but maintaining a respectful distance. "Yes," Sarah said, then added more quietly, "I didn't have much choice in the matter." There was something in her tone that told Jacob not to press further. Instead, he changed the subject, talking about the ranch, the weather, anything that might help her relax. Gradually, he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders as the warmth of the fire and the coffee did their work. As the afternoon wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, Jacob found himself increasingly concerned about his unexpected guest. There was definitely something she was running from, and, given the way she startled every time the wind rattled the windows, he suspected it wasn't just poverty or wanderlust that had driven her from Kansas. The coffee was strong and hot, and Sarah felt herself beginning to thaw out both physically and emotionally. Jacob seemed genuinely kind, and, for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world. But, as the storm outside grew stronger and darkness began to fall, Sarah knew she would have to stay the night. The thought terrified her, bringing back memories she tried desperately to push away. She gripped her coffee cup tighter and tried to convince herself that this time would be different, that not all men were like the ones who had hurt her. Jacob, watching her grow tense again as night approached, wished he knew how to reassure her that she was safe. Whatever had happened to her, it had left deep scars. All he could do was be patient and prove through his actions that he meant her no harm. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up, and both of them knew that Sarah Mackenzie, or Sarah Wells, as she now called herself, would be staying at the Martinez Ranch for at least one night. What neither of them could know was that this chance encounter would change both their lives forever, setting in motion a chain of events that would test their courage, their trust, and ultimately their capacity for love and healing. As the fire burned low and the storm raged on, two wounded souls sat in careful silence, each hoping they had finally found a place where they could begin to heal. Sarah woke before dawn, her body stiff from sleeping in the chair by the fireplace. Jacob had offered her his bed, but she had refused, too afraid to be that vulnerable. Instead, he had brought her blankets and pillows, then disappeared into what she assumed was his own room, leaving her alone with her thoughts and fears. The storm had finally passed sometime during the night, leaving behind a crisp, clean morning that sparkled with dewdrops. Sarah moved quietly to the window and looked out at the ranch bathed in golden sunlight. It was beautiful in a simple, honest way that reminded her of the farm where she had grown up, before everything had gone wrong. "Morning," came Jacob's quiet voice from behind her. Sarah spun around, her heart racing, but he was maintaining his distance, coffee pot in hand. "Sleep okay?" "Well enough," Sarah lied, smoothing down her rumpled dress. She had barely slept at all, starting awake at every small sound. "I should check on Belle and, then, be on my way." Jacob poured coffee into a fresh cup and set it on the table for her. "Horse won't be ready to travel for a few days at least. That swelling needs time to go down, and she shouldn't carry weight until I'm sure there's no lasting damage." Sarah's face went pale. "A few days?" She couldn't afford to stay here that long, both financially and emotionally. Every day she remained in one place increased the chance that someone might find her trail. "I could walk," she said desperately. "It's not that far to Billings." Jacob looked at her as if she had suggested jumping off a cliff. "Ma'am, it's near 40 miles to Billings through rough country. A woman alone on foot wouldn't make it halfway before running into trouble with wildlife, weather, or worse." "I have to keep moving," Sarah said, and there was real panic in her voice now. "I can't stay here." Jacob studied her carefully, seeing the fear that went deeper than simple impatience. "Sarah," he said gently, "what are you running from?" The direct question hit her like a physical blow. Sarah sank into the chair, her hands shaking as she picked up the coffee cup. For a moment, Jacob thought she might actually tell him the truth, but then she pulled that careful mask back into place. "I'm not running from anything," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I just need to reach my aunt as soon as possible." Jacob didn't believe her for a second, but he could see that pushing would only make her bolt. Instead, he sat down across from her and spoke in the same gentle tone he used with spooked horses. "Well, ready or not, Belle's not going anywhere today. Why don't we see how she's doing and take it one day at a time?" After a simple breakfast of eggs and biscuits that Jacob cooked with surprising skill, they walked out to the barn together. Belle was standing more comfortably, though she still favored the injured leg when she moved. Jacob examined the swelling, which had gone down slightly overnight. "She's healing," he said, running experienced hands along the leg. "But she needs more time. Maybe 3 or 4 more days." Sarah bit her lip, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. 3 or 4 days felt like an eternity when every instinct told her to keep running. "I could rent another horse," she suggested weakly. "With what money?" Jacob asked bluntly, then immediately regretted his directness when he saw her flush with shame. "I'm sorry, that was rude. It's just that I've seen folks make bad decisions when they're desperate, and I'd hate to see you get hurt." Sarah looked down at her hands, fighting the urge to confide in this kind stranger. But experience had taught her that men's kindness often came with a price, and she couldn't afford to let her guard down completely. "I'll work for my keep," she said quietly. "I can cook and clean, help with whatever needs doing around here." Jacob was about to protest that it wasn't necessary when he saw the pride in her eyes, the need to feel like she was earning her way rather than accepting charity. He understood that feeling. "All right," he said. "I suppose I could use help with some things." The house could use a woman's touch, and I've been putting off mending some gear that needs attention. Relief flooded Sarah's face. Work she could handle, it was the helpless feeling of being dependent that terrified her. They spent the morning together, Jacob showing her around the ranch while she got oriented. He had about 50 head of cattle, mostly longhorns that were hardy enough to survive the harsh Montana winters. The ranch had been his father's, and his father's before that, built by his grandfather who had come north from Mexico in search of opportunity and freedom. "What happened to your family?" Sarah asked as they walked among the cattle. Jacob's face darkened slightly. "My parents died of fever when I was 16. Lost my brother in a stampede 2 years ago. It's just been me since then. Sarah heard the loneliness in his voice and felt a kinship with it. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "What about you?" Jacob asked. "Your parents?" "Dead," Sarah said simply, and something in her tone told him not to ask for details. They worked together companionably throughout the day. Sarah proved to be surprisingly capable around the ranch, helping Jacob repair a section of fence and assisting with the evening feeding. Her hands were soft, suggesting she hadn't done much manual labor recently, but she worked without complaint and seemed to know her way around animals. As evening approached, Jacob noticed Sarah growing tense again. The thought of another night in close quarters with a man clearly terrified her, though she was trying hard not to show it. "I've been thinking," Jacob said as they finished the chores. "There's a small line shack about a quarter-mile up in the hills. My grandfather built it for winter shelter when he was watching the cattle. It's not much, but it's got a roof and a stove, and it would give you some privacy." Sarah's relief was so obvious that Jacob felt his heart clench. What had been done to this woman to make her so afraid? "That would be, thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They walked up to the line shack together as the sun was setting. It was indeed small, just one room with a narrow bed, a pot-bellied stove, and a table and chair. But it was clean and private, with a sturdy door that could be barred from the inside. "I'll bring up some food and blankets," Jacob said. "And there's a gun on the shelf if you need it, though you shouldn't have any trouble up here." Sarah's eyes went immediately to the rifle, and Jacob saw her shoulders relax slightly at the knowledge that she could defend herself if necessary. "Thank you," she said again. "For everything. I know I'm not making much sense, and I appreciate your patience." Jacob touched the brim of his hat. "We all have our reasons for things," he said quietly. "Good night, Sarah." Alone in the little cabin, Sarah finally allowed herself to break down and cry. For the first time since leaving Kansas, she felt truly safe. The tears were a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and the first tentative hope she had felt in months. Down at the main house, Jacob sat on his porch and looked up at the light glowing in the window of the line shack. He found himself wondering about the woman who had appeared so suddenly in his carefully ordered life. There was steel beneath her fear, he had seen it in the way she worked today, never backing down from a task no matter how difficult. But there was also a fragility that made him want to protect her, to stand between her and whatever demons were chasing her. The next few days fell into a comfortable routine. Sarah would come down to the house each morning to help with breakfast and the daily chores. She proved to be an excellent cook, much better than Jacob with his bachelor meals of beans and bacon. In return, he taught her what she needed to know about ranch life, how to read the weather, how to spot a sick animal, how to mend harness and repair tools. They talked carefully around their respective pasts, sharing stories about safer topics like books they had read or places they had traveled. Jacob learned that Sarah was well educated, with a quick mind and a dry sense of humor that emerged as she began to feel more comfortable. Sarah discovered that Jacob was not just a simple rancher, he read voraciously, spoke 3 languages, and had a deep understanding of the world beyond his remote valley. On the 3rd day, Sarah was in the house making bread when she heard horses approaching fast. Through the window, she saw 3 rough-looking men riding hard toward the ranch. Panic seized her immediately, and she dropped the bowl she was holding, sending flour flying everywhere. "Jacob," she called out, but he was already on his way to the house, having heard the riders himself. "Get upstairs," he said quietly but firmly. "Stay away from the windows." "Who are they?" Sarah whispered, but Jacob was already reaching for the shotgun he kept by the door. The lead writer was a big man with a cruel face and cold eyes. He wore expensive clothes that were dusty from hard writing, and there was something about his bearing that spoke of violence barely held in check. "Martinez," the man called out as he reined in his horse. "I'm looking for someone." Jacob stepped out onto the porch, shotgun held casually but ready. "Depends on who's looking," he replied evenly. From upstairs, Sarah peered carefully through the curtains and felt her blood turn to ice. The man asking the questions was Thomas Brennan, her former employer's eldest son and the reason she had fled Kansas in the middle of the night. He had found her trail somehow, and now he was here with two of his father's hired guns. "Name's Brennan," the man said, dismounting slowly. "I'm tracking a thief who stole from my family. Young woman, auburn hair, green eyes. Goes by Sarah Mackenzie, though she might be using a different name now." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. They thought she was a thief? But then, she realized what must have happened when she had fought Thomas off and escaped. He must have claimed she had stolen something to cover his attempted assault. It was her word against his, and who would believe a poor shop girl over the son of the most powerful family in 3 counties? "Don't know anyone by that name," Jacob said, his voice giving nothing away. "You boys look tired. Water your horses and be on your way." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that, Martinez? There'd be a reward for information. Good money." "I said I don't know her," Jacob repeated, and there was steel in his voice now. One of Brennan's companions, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, whispered something in his boss's ear. Brennan nodded and looked back at Jacob with a cold smile. "Mind if we look around? Won't take but a minute." "Yeah, I mind," Jacob said, raising the shotgun slightly. "This is private property, and you're not welcome here." For a moment, the tension stretched taut between the two groups of men. Sarah held her breath, knowing that Jacob was outnumbered and that if shooting started, he might not survive. The thought of this kind man being hurt because of her made her feel sick. Finally, Brennan remounted his horse. "We'll be checking every ranch and settlement between here and Canada," he said. "If you're hiding her, Martinez, we'll find out. And, when we do, you'll wish you'd cooperated." The 3 men rode away, but Sarah knew they would be back. They would ask questions in Billings, check with other ranchers, gradually tightening the net around her. She had put Jacob in danger by coming here, and the knowledge made her feel sick with guilt. When Jacob came upstairs, he found Sarah sitting on the edge of the bed, her face white as chalk. "They're gone," he said gently. "For now," Sarah whispered. Then, she looked up at him with haunted eyes. "I have to leave tonight. I won't let them hurt you because of me." Jacob sat down across from her, his face serious. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I think it's time you told me the truth." Sarah looked into Jacob's steady brown eyes and felt something break inside her. The weight of carrying her secret alone had been crushing her, and seeing this good man put himself at risk for her sake made her realize she couldn't keep running from the truth. "My real name is Sarah Mackenzie," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I worked at the Brennan family's general store in Dodge City for 2 years. Old Mr. Brennan was fair to me, paid decent wages, treated me with respect. But his son Thomas..." She stopped, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold the pieces together. Jacob waited patiently, his presence solid and reassuring without being demanding. "Thomas started paying attention to me about 6 months ago," Sarah continued. "At first it seemed harmless as compliments, small gifts, asking me to stay late to help with inventory. I needed the job, so I tried to be polite but keep my distance." Jacob's jaw tightened, already guessing where this was heading. "He got bolder," Sarah went on. "Started touching my arm, standing too close, making comments about my appearance. When I tried to discourage him, he would get angry, remind me that his family owned the store and could fire me anytime they wanted." The memory of those uncomfortable months made Sarah's skin crawl. She had felt trapped, knowing that the Brennans controlled most of the employment in their small town. 3 weeks ago, he cornered me alone in the storeroom after closing, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with the telling. He said he had been patient long enough, that it was time I showed proper appreciation for his family's kindness. When I tried to leave, he grabbed me. Jacob's hands clenched into fists, but he remained silent, letting her get it all out. He tore my dress, and, when I fought back, he hit me across the face so hard I saw stars. He said no one would believe me if I told anyone that I was just a poor orphan girl with no family or reputation to speak of. He said I should be grateful for his attention. Sarah's voice broke slightly on the last words, but she forced herself to continue. I managed to get away that time by hitting him with a heavy ledger book and running. But I knew he wouldn't give up. The next morning, he was waiting for me when I arrived at work, and the look in his eyes. I knew if I stayed, the next time he cornered me, I wouldn't get away. So you ran, Jacob said quietly. Sarah nodded. I packed everything I could carry and left that night. I was going to take the stage, but I overheard two of his men at the station asking questions about me. So I bought Belle from a farmer outside town and started riding. I thought if I could just get far enough away. But they followed you, Jacob finished. I never stole anything, Sarah said fiercely, finally, looking up to meet his eyes. I earned every penny I had, but now he's telling people I'm a thief to explain why he's chasing me across 3 territories. Who's going to believe my word against his? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. I believe you, he said simply. Those 3 words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been so afraid that even this kind man would doubt her story, would see her as damaged goods or a troublemaker bringing danger to his doorstep. You do, she whispered. I've known men like Thomas Brennan, Jacob said grimly. Rich, spoiled, used to taking whatever they want without consequences. And I've seen how they operate. If they can't have something, they destroy it rather than let anyone else have it either. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For the first time in months, someone knew the truth and believed her. But, Jacob, she said urgently, you understand now why I have to leave. They'll be back, and if they find me here, they'll hurt you too. Men like that don't forgive being stood up to. Jacob stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch he had worked so hard to build and maintain. Sarah was right, harboring her put everything at risk. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to help her on her way and wash his hands of the whole situation. But, as he looked back at her sitting there, small and frightened but still showing the courage that had carried her this far, he knew he couldn't do it. Something had changed in the past few days. This woman had awakened feelings in him that he had thought buried with his family. The thought of her facing those men alone, of what they would do to her when they caught her, made him feel sick. I have an idea, he said slowly. It's risky, but it might work. Sarah looked up at him with hope and fear warring in her eyes. We fake your death, Jacob said. Make it look like you tried to cross the river during the storm and drowned. They find some of your belongings downstream, maybe a piece of your dress, and they give up the search thinking the wilderness got you. Sarah stared at him. But how would we? There's an old mine shaft about 10 miles north of here, hidden in the hills. My grandfather used to prospect there before he gave up and turned to ranching. It's got a cabin that's still in decent shape, and there's water from a spring. You could hide there while I spread the story about the accident. And then, what? Sarah asked. I can't hide in a mine forever. Jacob took a deep breath, knowing he was about to change both their lives irrevocably. Then, you come back as someone else. A cousin of mine from Mexico, maybe, coming to help me run the ranch. New name, new story, new life. We could even make it legal eventually, if you wanted. Sarah understood what he was offering, and it took her breath away. Marriage to a good man, safety, a chance to start over completely. But it also meant accepting help from someone she barely knew, trusting him with her life in the most literal sense. Why would you do that for me? She asked quietly. Jacob was silent for a long moment, struggling with feelings he wasn't sure he was ready to name. Because you deserve better than to spend your life running and hiding, he said finally. Because those men have no right to hunt you down like an animal. And because. He paused, then met her eyes directly. Because I care what happens to you. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had cared about her welfare without expecting something in return. But the plan he was suggesting was incredibly dangerous, and she couldn't ask him to take such risks for her sake. If they caught us, they'd probably hang you as an accomplice, she said. I can't let you do that. That's my choice to make, Jacob replied firmly. But I won't force you into anything. If you want to keep running, I'll help you get away clean with a fresh horse and supplies. It's up to you. Sarah looked at this man who was offering her everything she had never dared to hope for: safety, protection, and maybe even love. The smart thing would be to take the horse and supplies and disappear into the vast wilderness. But she was tired of running, tired of looking over her shoulder, tired of being afraid. What would we do about Belle, she asked, and Jacob knew she had made her decision. Turn her loose with some of the wild horses that run in the canyon. If anyone asks, I'll say she broke free during the storm and I never found her again. They spent the rest of the evening planning. Sarah would leave at first light, taking only what she could carry in a small pack. Jacob would wait a day, then ride into Billings and spread word that a woman had been seen trying to cross the swollen river during the storm, and that some of her belongings had been found downstream but no body had been recovered. As the night grew late, they found themselves reluctant to part company. Tomorrow would begin a dangerous gamble that could cost both of them everything. Jacob, Sarah said quietly as they prepared to leave the line shack. I want you to know that whatever happens, I'm grateful. You've been kinder to me than I had any right to expect. Jacob looked down at her, noting how the lamplight brought out the gold in her hair and made her green eyes seem to glow. He had spent 3 years alone on this ranch, telling himself he was content with his solitary life. Now he couldn't imagine going back to that emptiness. Sarah, he said, his voice rougher than usual. I need you to know that this isn't just about helping someone in trouble. These past few days, having you here, it's made me remember what it feels like to not be alone. Sarah stepped closer, drawn by the honesty in his voice. For the first time since Kansas, she found herself wanting to trust not just in someone's good intentions, but in the possibility of something deeper. I've been afraid for so long, she whispered. Afraid of trusting anyone, afraid of caring about anything because it might be taken away. But, with you, I feel like maybe I could learn to stop being afraid. Jacob reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she didn't, he gently cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. You're the bravest woman I've ever met, he said softly. And if we can pull this off, if we can make you safe, then maybe we can both stop being so alone. Sarah leaned into his touch, marveling at how right it felt. Please, she whispered, and, for the first time, the word wasn't a plea born of fear but of hope. It won't take long, Jacob murmured, understanding that she was asking him to be patient, to give her time to heal from what had been done to her. We have all the time in the world. As they stood there in the lamplight, two damaged souls finding healing in each other's presence, neither of them heard the soft footsteps of the man who had circled back to watch the ranch. Thomas Brennan had not believed Jacob's denials, and he had left one of his men hidden in the hills to keep watch. Now, as Brennan's scout crept closer to the cabin window, he saw all the proof his boss would need. The woman they were hunting was indeed here, and now she and the rancher who had lied to them were planning some kind of deception. The scout smiled coldly as he began to make his way back to where Brennan and the other man were camped. Tomorrow's dawn would bring more than just the beginning of Sarah's escape plan, it would bring a reckoning that none of them were prepared for. Sarah woke to the sound of gunshots echoing across the valley. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, but the beauty of the morning was shattered by the harsh crack of rifles and the thunder of approaching horses. She rolled out of the narrow bed and grabbed the rifle from the shelf, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Through the cabin window, she could see 3 riders charging toward the main house, guns drawn. Jacob was nowhere to be seen. Panic seized her as she realized what had happened. Somehow, Brennan had discovered their plan. Maybe he had left someone to watch the ranch, or maybe he had simply decided to search more thoroughly. Either way, Jacob was in deadly danger because of her. Sarah burst from the line shack and ran down the hill toward the ranch house, the rifle clutched in her hands. She could hear shouting now, Brennan's voice loud and commanding above the chaos. "We know she's here, Martinez. Send her out and maybe we'll let you live." Sarah reached the edge of the yard and took cover behind the woodshed. From there, she could see Jacob crouched behind the water trough, his shotgun trained on the three men who had spread out to surround the house. Blood was running down his left arm, and she realized he had already been hit. "I told you yesterday," Jacob called back, his voice steady despite his injury. "I don't know any Sarah Mackenzie." Brennan laughed, a cold sound that made Sarah's skin crawl. "My man saw her in your little love nest up there last night. Saw you two making plans to fake her death and hide her away. Did you really think we were that stupid?" Sarah's heart sank. They had been watched, their entire plan exposed. Now Jacob was going to pay the price for trying to help her. "Here's what's going to happen," Brennan continued. "The girl comes out with her hands up, and you get to live. She stays hidden, and we burn this place to the ground with both of you in it." Sarah knew she had no choice. She couldn't let Jacob die for her sake, couldn't let him lose everything he had worked for because she had brought her troubles to his door. She started to stand up, ready to surrender herself to save him, when Jacob's voice rang out across the yard. "Sarah, don't you dare." The sound of her real name being spoken aloud seemed to galvanize Brennan and his men. They began closing in on the house, using the outbuildings for cover as they advanced. "Time's up, Martinez," Brennan shouted. "Boys, burn it down." One of his men pulled out a torch and started toward the barn, but Jacob's shotgun boomed and the man spun around, clutching his shoulder. The torch fell harmlessly to the ground. "That the best you got, rancher," the third man taunted, rising from behind a fence post to take aim at Jacob. Sarah didn't think, didn't hesitate. She brought the rifle to her shoulder and fired, the way her father had taught her when she was just a girl learning to hunt rabbits. The bullet caught the gunman's center mass, and he dropped like a stone. The sudden shot from an unexpected direction caused confusion among the remaining attackers. Brennan spun toward the woodshed, trying to locate this new threat, while his wounded companion scrambled for better cover. "Sarah, get back!" Jacob shouted, but she was already moving, using the distraction to dart from one building to another, working her way closer to the house. Brennan spotted her movement and sent a barrage of shots in her direction, splinters flying from the corner of the chicken coop where she had taken shelter. But his angle was wrong, and Jacob used the opportunity to put another load of buckshot into the wounded man, dropping him for good. Now it was just Brennan, alone and outnumbered, but still dangerous in his desperation and rage. "You killed my men," he snarled, his carefully maintained facade of civilization cracking to reveal the violent man beneath. "I'm going to make you both pay for that." He began moving toward the house in a crouch, firing as he went. Jacob was forced to keep his head down, unable to get a clear shot, and Sarah realized that from her position, she had a perfect angle on Brennan's flank. She raised the rifle again, taking careful aim. This shot would end it, one way or another. But, as she was about to squeeze the trigger, Brennan suddenly changed direction, charging directly toward Jacob's position with a roar of fury. Jacob tried to swing his shotgun around, but Brennan was too close, too fast. The two men collided in a tangle of arms and weapons, rolling across the dusty yard as they fought for control. Sarah ran toward them, but she couldn't get a clear shot with the two men locked in deadly combat. Jacob was bigger and stronger, but he was already wounded and Brennan was fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. Brennan managed to get his hands around Jacob's throat, his face twisted with murderous rage. "Should have minded your own business, Martinez," he gasped. "Now you get to die for this worthless whore." Something snapped inside Sarah at those words. She had spent months running and hiding, letting fear control her life, allowing this man and his cruelty to define who she was. But no more. She was not worthless, and Jacob was not going to die because of her past. She reversed the rifle in her hands and brought the butt down hard on the back of Brennan's skull. The blow stunned him enough for Jacob to break free and roll away, gasping for breath. Brennan turned on Sarah with a snarl, blood trickling down his forehead. "There's the little thief," he said, climbing slowly to his feet. "You've led us quite a chase, but it's over now." "I never stole anything from you," Sarah said, backing away but keeping the rifle ready. "And I'm not going back." "Oh, but you are," Brennan replied, drawing a knife from his belt. "Dead or alive, you're coming back with me. Though I think I'll enjoy it more if you're still breathing when we get there." He lunged at her, but Sarah was ready. She dodged his wild swing and brought the rifle barrel up into his ribs, doubling him over. As he gasped for breath, Jacob appeared behind him with a piece of firewood and put an end to the fight with one solid blow to the head. Brennan crumpled to the ground and lay still. For a moment, Sarah and Jacob stood staring at each other across his unconscious form, hardly believing the fight was over. "Is he dead?" Sarah whispered. Jacob knelt and checked for a pulse. "No, just out cold. Though he's going to have a powerful headache when he wakes up." Sarah sank to her knees in the dust, all the strength going out of her legs at once. The rifle slipped from her nerveless fingers as the reality of what had just happened hit her. She had killed a man. She had taken a human life, even if it was in defense of Jacob and herself. Jacob was beside her in an instant, his good arm going around her shoulders. "Hey," he said gently. "You did what you had to do. They came here to kill us both." "I know," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "But I never thought. I never imagined I could actually." "You saved my life," Jacob said firmly. "And your own. There's no shame in that." They sat together in the morning sunlight, holding each other and trying to process the violence that had shattered their peaceful valley. Around them, the evidence of the gunfight was stark: 2 dead men and 1 unconscious, blood on the ground, bullet holes in the buildings. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked finally. Jacob was quiet for a moment, thinking it through. "We tie up Brennan and take him to the sheriff in Billings. With those 2 dead and him caught red-handed trying to kill us on my property, I think the law will be more interested in his crimes than in whatever story he's been telling about you." Sarah looked at him doubtfully. "You think they'll believe us?" "Honey, there are 3 witnesses to what happened here: you, me, and him. And the physical evidence backs up our story. Plus, once the law starts looking into Thomas Brennan's background, I suspect they'll find other women who have stories to tell about him." It was a sobering thought, but probably true. Men like Brennan rarely stopped with just one victim. They spent the morning cleaning up the aftermath of the fight. Jacob's wound turned out to be minor, a graze across his upper arm that looked worse than it was. Sarah insisted on bandaging it herself, her gentle touch making him acutely aware of how close he had come to losing her. When Brennan finally regained consciousness, he was tied securely to a chair in Jacob's kitchen, his previous arrogance replaced by sullen anger. "You can't prove anything," he said when Jacob laid out their plans. "It's your word against mine, and I'm a Brennan. My family has influence in 3 territories. "Maybe," Jacob replied calmly. "But you came onto my land with armed men and tried to kill us both. That's attempted murder, and out here, that's a hanging offense regardless of what your last name is." For the first time, Sarah saw real fear flicker in Brennan's eyes. He was used to his family's money and power protecting him from consequences, but he was a long way from Kansas now, in a territory where frontier justice still ruled. The ride to Billings took most of the day, with Brennan tied to his saddle and guarded by both Jacob and Sarah. They had decided to tell the truth, all of it, and let the law sort out right from wrong. Sheriff McKinnon was a weathered man in his 50s who had seen enough of life to recognize truth when he heard it. He listened to their story without interruption, occasionally glancing at Brennan's furious face as the full scope of the man's crimes became clear. "You got any proof of these allegations, miss?" he asked Sarah when she had finished. Sarah reached into her bag and pulled out the torn dress she had been wearing the night she fled Kansas, along with several letters Brennan had written to her that became increasingly threatening when she failed to respond to his advances. The sheriff examined the evidence, then looked at the bruises that were still fading on Sarah's arms where Brennan had grabbed her. "Mr. Brennan," he said finally, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault, and a few other charges I'll think of while you're sitting in my jail. And I'll be sending word to the sheriff in Dodge City about these other allegations." "You can't do this," Brennan exploded. "I demand you contact my father immediately." "Oh, I'll contact him all right," McKinnon replied dryly. "I'm sure he'll be real interested to hear what his boy has been up to." As they led Brennan away to his cell, Sarah felt a weight she had been carrying for months finally lift from her shoulders. It was over. She was free. Jacob put his arm around her as they watched Brennan disappear into the jail. "So," he said quietly, "what happens now?" Sarah looked up at him, this good man who had risked everything to help her find her way back to safety and hope. The fear that had controlled her life for so long was gone, replaced by something she had never expected to feel again, the possibility of genuine happiness. "Now," she said, reaching up to touch his face gently, "I think we start that new life you mentioned. If you'll still have me." Jacob's answer was to pull her close and kiss her right there in the middle of Billings Main Street, not caring who saw them or what anyone might think. Sarah melted into his embrace, finally, understanding what it meant to feel truly safe in someone's arms. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood on the porch of her home, watching her husband work with their small herd of cattle in the valley below. She wore a simple gold band on her finger and carried their first child beneath her heart, evidence of the new life they had built together from the ashes of their separate griefs. Belle grazed peacefully in the pasture beside the house, her injury long healed, a reminder of the journey that had brought Sarah to this place of peace and love. Sometimes, late at night when the wind was right, Sarah thought she could still hear the echo of those desperate words she had spoken that first night, "Please, it hurts." But now those words had a different meaning. They were not a plea born of fear and pain, but a memory of the moment when her real life had begun. The moment when a kind stranger had looked into her eyes and promised that it wouldn't take long for the hurting to stop. He had been right. Love, it turned out, was indeed the strongest medicine of all. In Dodge City, Thomas Brennan rotted in prison, abandoned by the family whose name he had disgraced. The Brennan empire crumbled under the weight of scandal and investigation, revealing a pattern of abuse and corruption that reached back for years. But that was someone else's story now. Sarah's story was here, in this peaceful valley, with this good man who had taught her that not all strength came from enduring pain alone, and that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was to let someone else help carry the load. As the sun set over the Montana Territory, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Sarah Martinez smiled and went inside to start dinner for her family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also new joys, and she was finally ready to face them all.